Stranded millionaire CEO accepts a ride from a single mother, then realizes who she is. He looked at the clock and realized he had less than 20 minutes before the meeting started. Not enough time to wait for help. Not enough time to fix the car on his own. Just enough time to make a decision he hadn't planned for, and whatever he chose on that empty stretch of road would shape the rest of his day in ways no meeting ever could. The rental car sat dead on the shoulder of the road. No smoke, no noise, just silence and a blinking warning light. The kind that makes your chest tighten without asking permission. Grant Holloway adjusted his jacket without knowing why. It was a habit, a way to feel normal, a way to feel in control, even when control was already gone. The road stretched empty in both directions. No buildings, no people, just wind and late afternoon light, and a decision pressing harder by the second. Then a faded SUV passed him, slowed down, kept going, stopped, and slowly reversed. If you believe in compassion and the quiet strength of ordinary people, take a moment to like and subscribe. Stories like this remind us how one small act can change everything. The window rolled down halfway. A woman looked at him, not worried, not rushed. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't ask where he was going. She just asked if he needed help. Grant opened his mouth to say no. That was his instinct. Always had been. But the word didn't come out. Something else did. Before he answered, "Let me ask you this. What would you do if help showed up at the worst possible time? Would you protect your schedule, or would you risk everything staying exactly as it is? Stay with me, because this moment changes everything." Grant Holloway had built his life around predictability. He was the kind of man who knew exactly where he needed to be and when. Every meeting, every flight, every call lived inside a carefully planned calendar. People depended on his decisions, and he rarely allowed space for mistakes. That sense of control had become his comfort, and also his shield. He was driving between two mid-sized cities that afternoon for a meeting worth several $1 million. The acquisition on the table could change the company's future before the end of the year. Grant had chosen a modest rental car on purpose, something that wouldn't draw attention. He wanted this trip to be quiet, efficient, forgettable. Just another box checked on a long list of responsibilities. His phone still worked, though the signal flickered in and out. Emails were coming in, reminders stacking up, the clock moving faster than he liked. He kept glancing at the time, recalculating his arrival with each passing mile. He hated being late, not because of appearances, but because it meant losing control, and control was how he stayed calm in a chaotic world. When the car finally shut down, it did so without drama. No loud noise, no warning signs that made sense to him. Just a sudden heaviness in the steering wheel, and silence where the engine should be. Grant pulled over slowly, heart pounding in a way he didn't expect. He knew immediately this wasn't a delay he could fix on his own. The roadside felt strangely empty, as if the world had stepped away for a moment. No nearby exits, no buildings, no clear sense of where he was exactly. He called the rental company and listened as they explained the wait time. More than an hour, maybe longer, depending on availability. That answer settled into his chest like a weight. Grant leaned back against the car and looked at the horizon. He wasn't angry, just unsettled. This wasn't part of the plan, and he didn't like how exposed it made him feel. There was no assistant to call, no shortcut to take, just time slipping through his fingers. He checked his phone again, knowing it wouldn't change anything. The meeting was still happening, with or without him. The people inside that room would still be waiting, still expecting answers. Grant wondered, briefly, what would happen if he didn't make it at all? That thought lingered longer than it should have, and just as he started preparing himself for damage control, something unexpected approached from behind. Not help in the form he was used to, not a solution he could buy or demand, something slower, quieter, and completely outside his plan. Grant didn't know it yet, but the hardest part wasn't being late. It was deciding whether to accept what came next. The SUV that slowed down behind him didn't look impressive or new, and that was the first thing Grant noticed. It wasn't rushing, wasn't honking, and didn't pull up too close like someone impatient. The driver seemed to be taking her time, as if she wasn't afraid of being late. When the window rolled down, Grant saw a woman about his age, calm eyes, steady posture. Her voice carried no urgency when she asked if he needed help, just presence. Grant hesitated longer than he meant to, because accepting help had never been easy for him. His instinct was to say he was fine, that he had already called someone, that he could handle it. That instinct had protected him for years, especially in moments where vulnerability felt risky. But the road was empty, the clock was not forgiving, and the offer felt sincere. So instead of refusing, he told her where he needed to go. She introduced herself as Mara Ellis and explained she was heading back into the city to pick up her kids. There was no hesitation in her tone when she offered him a ride, just a small nod as if the decision was already made. Grant noticed how natural it all felt to her, like stopping for strangers wasn't unusual. That made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite explain. Still, he thanked her and walked toward the passenger side. As he opened the door, Grant became aware of how exposed he suddenly felt. This wasn't a car service, wasn't an assistant, wasn't something he had arranged. This was a stranger offering time, space, and safety without asking for anything in return. He adjusted his jacket again before sitting down, trying to ground himself. The door closed with a soft click that felt heavier than it should have. Inside the car, the air felt different from what he was used to. There was no business call playing through the speakers, no GPS voice filling the silence, just the sound of traffic in the distance and the hum of an engine that worked. Mara didn't ask questions right away, and Grant appreciated that more than he expected. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Grant told himself this was temporary, just a ride, just a solution to a problem. He reminded himself that once he reached the building, everything would return to normal. The meeting would happen, decisions would be made, and the day would move on. But as the car merged back onto the road, something inside him shifted slightly. It felt like stepping onto a path he hadn't planned to walk. Mara finally broke the silence with a casual comment about traffic near the city at that hour. Grant responded politely, keeping his answers short and his tone neutral. He didn't share what he did for a living, and she didn't push him to. That quiet understanding created an unexpected ease between them. Neither of them realized yet that this small choice would lead to something far bigger, because what began as a simple ride was already turning into something else. Not dramatic, not romantic, not obvious. Just a moment where two lives slowed down at the same time. Grant could still turn this into nothing more than a delay in his schedule, but the next few minutes would quietly take that option away. As the car moved forward, Grant slowly realized how unfamiliar the situation felt to him. Not because of danger, but because of how little control he had over it. He wasn't driving, wasn't choosing the route, and wasn't managing the pace of the moment. For someone who spent his life directing outcomes, this quiet dependence felt unsettling. He sat back in the seat and tried to relax his shoulders, but his body didn't fully listen. It was easier to negotiate contracts than to sit with uncertainty. Mara drove with steady confidence, her hands relaxed on the wheel, eyes focused on the road ahead. She didn't rush, even though traffic thickened as they approached the city. There was a calm rhythm to the way she moved, like someone used to carrying responsibility without complaint. Grant noticed the small details, the worn edges of the dashboard, the faint scent of laundry detergent. Nothing about the car tried to impress him, and somehow that made everything feel more real. The silence between them returned, but it wasn't empty. Grant found himself listening to the sounds outside, the distant horns, the wind brushing past the windows. Without thinking, he stopped checking his phone, letting it rest dark in his hand. The meeting still existed, the consequences still waited, but they felt farther away now. For the first time that day, his mind wasn't racing ahead. Mara eventually spoke about her kids, not in a dramatic way, just simple updates about schedules and homework. She mentioned juggling work hours and school pickups, laughing softly at how complicated it always felt. Grant nodded, unsure what to say, but genuinely listening. He wasn't used to conversations that didn't ask anything from him. There was no expectation for advice, solutions, or authority. As she talked, Grant felt a subtle tightening in his chest that surprised him. Not sadness exactly, but recognition of something he'd been avoiding. He thought about how rarely anyone spoke to him without calculating what he could offer in return. Here, there was no transaction, no agenda, no leverage, just shared time inside a moving car. The vulnerability crept in quietly, without warning. Grant realized how exposed he was if this ride didn't work out, if traffic stalled, if something went wrong. He had no backup plan, No assistant waiting to fix things. If he failed to arrive on time, it would be entirely his responsibility. That weight settled deeper than the delay itself. Mara glanced at him briefly, as if sensing the shift in his mood. She didn't ask if he was okay, didn't push for conversation. Instead, she adjusted the speed slightly, keeping the drive smooth and steady. That small gesture felt oddly supportive. Though she never said a word, Grant felt seen without being questioned. By the time the city skyline appeared ahead, something inside Grant had already changed. Not dramatically, not enough for him to name it, but the part of him that usually stayed guarded had softened just a little. He didn't yet understand what this moment was preparing him for. He only knew that the real test of the day hadn't happened yet. As they got closer to the business district, the atmosphere outside the car slowly changed, with taller buildings replacing open road and traffic tightening around them. Mara mentioned, almost casually, that she always felt a little tense driving through that part of the city. She explained that her brother-in-law worked nearby and that the company he worked for carried a lot of pressure. According to her, it was a place where mistakes were noticed and expectations were high. She said all of this without complaint, just stating facts from her everyday life. Grant felt his stomach tighten as soon as she mentioned the name of the company. It was the same building he was headed to, the same people he was about to meet with. For a split second, he considered correcting her, telling her exactly who he was and why he was there. That impulse came from habit, not honesty, and for the first time, he chose not to follow it. He realized something in that moment that surprised him. Mara was speaking freely because she didn't see him as someone important. There was no careful tone, no filtered language, no effort to impress. She was being herself, and she was letting him do the same without asking for it. Grant didn't want to interrupt that. Mara went on, explaining that her brother-in-law talked about work constantly, often bringing stress home with him. She said he was a good man, just tired, always carrying responsibility on his shoulders. Grant listened closely, hearing reflections of himself in the description. He wondered how many people in his own life talked about him the same way. That thought landed heavier than he expected. The car slowed as they reached the edge of the corporate area. Grant could see the building ahead, glass and steel catching the late afternoon light. Everything familiar was waiting for him there, along with expectations he knew how to meet. But inside the car, the air felt different, almost insulated from that world. He felt an unexpected reluctance to step out. Mara pulled over smoothly near the entrance and put the car in park. She told him this was as close as she could get without being late for her kids. Grant thanked her, his voice quieter than usual, and reached for the door handle. Neither of them noticed his phone resting between the seat and the console. Both of them were already focused on something else. As Grant stepped onto the sidewalk, he paused for a brief second before closing the door. He looked back at Mara, wanting to say something more, something that explained the moment. Instead, he simply thanked her again and wished her a good evening. She smiled, nodded, and drove away without looking back. The simplicity of the exchange stayed with him. Walking toward the building, Grant felt the weight of what he had chosen not to say. He told himself it didn't matter, that it was just a ride, just a coincidence. But deep down, he knew something important had already shifted. He had been seen without being identified, and he had allowed it to happen. Grant entered the building already preparing himself for resistance, knowing that being late would not be well received in a room full of executives who valued punctuality as a form of respect. He apologized once, clearly and without excuses, then took his seat and listened as the meeting resumed. The atmosphere was tense, not hostile, but cautious, as if everyone was measuring how much trust could still be extended. Grant felt the familiar pressure return, yet something in him responded differently than usual. Instead of pushing, he chose to slow down. As the discussion unfolded, Grant noticed how often he would normally interrupt, correct, or steer the conversation toward his preferred outcome. This time, he stayed quiet longer, allowing others to finish their thoughts without rushing them. He asked questions that came from curiosity rather than strategy, and the shift was subtle but noticeable. The room gradually softened, not because of authority, but because of presence. Grant was fighting for something now, though no one else could see it yet. What surprised him most was how often his thoughts drifted back to the car ride, not to the delay, but to the calm tone of Mara's voice and the ease of the silence they shared. He realized he was grounding himself in that memory, using it to steady his nerves. It wasn't something he had planned, and that made it powerful. For the first time, connection was helping him lead. Meanwhile, across town, Mara finished picking up her kids and drove home with the usual mix of noise and distraction. She didn't think much about the stranger at first, assuming their paths had already separated. It wasn't until she parked and reached for her bag that she noticed the phone left behind. She picked it up instinctively, recognizing it didn't belong to her. Without unlocking it, she understood it had to be his. The screen lit up with missed calls and calendar alerts, revealing a life far more structured than she expected. Mara felt a brief moment of hesitation, realizing she hadn't given a ride to just anyone. Still, she didn't feel regret, only responsibility. She placed the phone carefully on the kitchen counter, making a mental note to return it. There was no urgency in her decision, just intention. Back in the meeting room, Grant made a choice that surprised even him. He adjusted part of the deal in a way that favored long-term partnership over immediate gain. It wasn't reckless, but it was generous in a way he usually avoided. The reaction around the table shifted, interest replacing suspicion. Something was opening. As the meeting continued, Grant felt the weight of the day pressing forward, not backward. He wasn't fighting against an opponent, but for a direction that felt more honest. Every choice he made carried the quiet influence of that unexpected kindness. He didn't know yet how the day would end, but he knew he wasn't finished choosing, because while Grant believed he was helping others by changing his approach, something else was quietly aligning. The lost phone, the unfinished conversation, and the choices still waiting to be made were all moving closer together. Neither Grant nor Mara could see how their paths would cross again, but the next connection would not be accidental, and it would ask more from both of them. By the time the meeting reached its final stage, something fundamental had shifted in the room, though no one named it out loud. The conversation no longer felt like a negotiation between sides, but like a shared effort to understand what could actually work. Grant noticed people leaning forward instead of crossing their arms, listening instead of waiting to speak. He felt a quiet sense of alignment, the kind that doesn't come from winning but from being understood. It was unfamiliar, and it stayed with him. At one point, the client mentioned his sister in passing, almost as a break from the seriousness of the discussion. He laughed lightly and said she had called earlier to mention giving a ride to a stranger whose car broke down. According to her, the man seemed polite, distracted, and a little out of place, like someone carrying too much on his shoulders. Grant recognized himself immediately in the description. Though his name was never spoken, that moment connected the room he was in to the road he had been on. Grant felt something tighten and then soften inside his chest, a reaction he couldn't fully explain. He realized that, for once, he had been seen without his title, without context, without expectation. There was a strange relief in knowing that someone's impression of him came from who he was in a quiet moment. He wondered how often people around him had never met that version of him at all. The thought stayed with him longer than the meeting itself. As the deal moved toward agreement, Grant noticed how differently he felt about the outcome. It mattered, of course, but it wasn't consuming him the way it normally would. What stayed at the front of his mind was the simple honesty of the situation earlier that day. A broken car, a stranger who stopped, and a conversation that asked nothing from him. That connection had already reshaped the day in ways no contract ever could. The meeting ended on a note of cautious optimism, handshakes replacing tension. The client thanked Grant not just for his flexibility, but for the way he approached the conversation. He said it felt less like a transaction and more like a partnership. Grant nodded, accepting the compliment without deflecting it. He understood now where that shift had come from. As Grant gathered his things, he reached instinctively for his phone and felt his pocket was empty. The realization hit him quietly, without panic, but with immediate clarity. He knew exactly where the phone was and who had it. More importantly, he knew he wanted to see her again, not just to retrieve it. That awareness surprised him. Outside the building, the city felt louder than before, more demanding. Grant stepped aside, letting people pass, and took a breath. The business part of the day was settling into place, but something unfinished was pulling at him. He sensed that the most important part of the story hadn't happened yet, and it wasn't waiting in a boardroom, because somewhere across town, A phone sat quietly on a kitchen counter, carrying more than missed calls. It held the possibility of another conversation, another choice, another moment of connection. Grant didn't know when or how that door would open again, but he felt certain it would. And when it did, the stakes would be personal. The invitation to dinner came later that evening, delivered in a casual tone that made it sound optional, though Grant sensed it wasn't. The client explained it wouldn't be formal, just family, something simple after a long day. Grant hesitated for a moment, calculating the optics, the time, the energy it would take. Normally, he would have declined politely and returned to his hotel, convincing himself that rest was necessary. Instead, he accepted without overthinking, already aware that this day wasn't following his usual rules. The house was modest, warm, and full of sound when Grant arrived, the kind of place that carried life in its walls. Children's voices echoed from another room, mixed with laughter and the smell of pizza filling the air. Nothing about the setting matched the corporate intensity of the afternoon, and that contrast caught him off guard. Grant stood at the doorway longer than necessary, unsure how to place himself in a space that didn't require performance. That uncertainty made him feel strangely human, and he didn't rush to push it away. When he stepped inside, he saw Mara near the kitchen, focused on opening a pizza box while keeping an eye on her kids. She looked up and recognized him immediately, surprise flickering across her face before settling into something softer and more thoughtful. Without making a scene, she reached for the phone resting on the counter and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed briefly. A small moment, neither commented on, yet both clearly noticed. Grant thanked her, his voice lower than before, carrying more weight than the words themselves. For a brief moment, the noise of the room faded for him. The laughter, the clinking plates, even the conversation around the table softened into the background. What stayed was the feeling that he wasn't being evaluated or measured. He was simply being welcomed, without expectations, and that unsettled him more than pressure ever had. Throughout dinner, Grant found himself watching more than speaking, absorbing the rhythm of the family. He noticed how Mara balanced conversation and care, answering questions while staying present with her kids. There was a quiet strength in the way she moved through the room, never demanding attention, never shrinking from it either. Grant felt drawn to that steadiness, even as he tried to remind himself that this wasn't his world. Still, a part of him wondered what it would feel like if it were. At one point, one of the children mentioned how their mom almost never stopped for strangers on the road. The comment was casual, said without drama or awareness of its impact. It landed heavily in Grant's chest as he realized how close this entire encounter had come to never happening. A single decision, made in a quiet and uncertain moment, had redirected the entire day for both of them. That awareness stayed with him long after the laughter returned. The adults continued talking around the table, sharing stories that had nothing to do with work or status. Grant contributed sparingly, choosing honesty over impression whenever he spoke. He talked about travel, about long days, about the exhaustion of always being expected to lead. Mara listened without interrupting, her attention steady, offering understanding instead of advice. The space between them felt charged, not with romance, but with recognition. As the evening went on, Grant noticed how relaxed he felt in a way he hadn't experienced in years. There was no performance required, no version of himself he needed to maintain. He wasn't being evaluated, negotiated with, or measured against expectations. He was simply present, sharing time with people who expected nothing from him. That simplicity felt deeply restorative. When it was time to leave, Grant lingered near the door, unsure how to end the night. He thanked the family, offered polite goodbyes, and turned toward Mara last. Their eyes met for a moment longer than necessary, carrying unspoken understanding and respect. Neither mentioned the car ride, the meeting, or what came next, but both felt the weight of something meaningful settling quietly between them. Grant expected the night to end the way most evenings ended for him, with a polite goodbye and a clean exit back into his own world. He had already thanked everyone, already stepped toward the door, already told himself this was just an unusual detour in an otherwise normal day. But as he reached for the handle, he heard Mara's voice behind him, quiet enough that it wasn't meant for the whole room. She wasn't trying to make a point, and she wasn't asking for anything, which is exactly why it stopped him. He turned back, and the expression on her face told him she was about to say something she normally kept to herself. Mara admitted she almost didn't stop on the road, and she said it like a confession, not like a story meant to entertain. She explained that she'd been having a hard week, one of those weeks where everything feels fragile and every decision feels heavier than it should. She'd told herself she couldn't afford delays, because her kids needed her steady and on time, and because life didn't leave room for extra problems. When she saw him standing alone beside the dead car, she felt that split-second fear that every woman understands. The instinct that says, keep